The decree was nailed to the frost-slicked heartwood of the village. It smelled of vellum and fear. 18 years after the blight began, the Alpha King was dying. The curse, long held in the cradle of his bones, was finally breaking him. He summoned the kingdom's Omegas, not for their strength, they had none, but for their scent, their balance, their desperate one-in-a-million chance of being a salve. Althea, her healer's bag already packed, touched the frozen iron of the nail. She remembered a different king, a fleeting childhood memory of silver eyes and a moment of impossible childish bravery. The journey to the capital was a pilgrimage of silence. The land was sick, suffocated by a rime frost that clung to the grey, skeletal branches of the pines. The snow underfoot didn't crunch, it sighed, a sound of exhausted surrender. Althea's breath plumed in the thin, metallic air. She was one of a dozen Omegas, pale-faced girls and anxious, aging women, all huddled in the open cart, all sharing the same scent of muted terror. They were the kingdom's last resort, which meant they were no resort at all. They were a ritual, a formality before the end. The citadel rose from the mountain pass not as a structure, but as a wound in the rock. It was black basalt, sharp-edged and menacing, a fortress built to keep the world out or perhaps to keep something in. The wind didn't whistle here. It groaned, moving through the arrow slits like a mourner. They were processed, not greeted, stripped of their traveling cloaks, washed in bitterly cold water, and dressed in simple undyed wool. The castle was cold, not the vibrant, biting cold of a healthy winter, but a deep, penetrating cellar-damp cold that seemed to radiate from the very stones. Fireplaces were lit, but the flames guttered low as if starved of air. A man named Valerius, his face a map of stern disapproval, addressed them. He was the king's elder, his robes heavy, his alpha scent soured with anxiety. "You are here to serve. You will be presented. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not touch His Majesty. The curse is unsensitive. Your presence is the medicine. If your nature is found wanting, you will be dismissed. If your nature is found wanting." Althea's heart, a small trapped bird, beat against her ribs. They were led into the great hall. It was a cavern of shadows. The ceiling was lost in darkness, the vast fireplace a weak, flickering ember. At the far end, on a throne that looked more like a cage of stone and iron, sat the king. He was a rumor-made flesh. The boy she'd seen 18 years ago, the young, terrifyingly beautiful Alpha who had just taken the throne, was gone. This king was a monument to pain. Theron was massive, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the crown and the curse, and he was doing both. His black hair was long, threaded with silver that looked less like age and more like frost, but it was his stillness that was so terrible. He didn't move. He just was. A mountain enduring a storm. One by one the Omegas were brought forward. They would stand 10 feet from the dais, bow and wait. The king's head would lift. He would inhale a slow rattling sound. A flicker of something, disappointment, agony, would cross his features. Then a faint, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Valerius would snap his fingers. Paris missed. The girl before Althea, a trembling young woman from the coast, began to weep silently as she was led away. It was Althea's turn. She walked forward, the stone floor freezing through the thin soles of her slippers. She kept her eyes down. She bowed. She waited. The silence stretched. She could hear the pop of a log in the dying fire. She could hear the heavy, strained measure of her own blood. Then the sound of his inhale. It was different this time. It wasn't a gasp, but a long, shuddering draw of air. It was the sound of a man finding oxygen after being held under water. Althea's head snapped up against her will. His eyes were locked on her. They were silver, just as she remembered, but not bright. They were clouded, like a winter sky before the blizzard hits. He was pale, a tracery of blue veins at his temples. He was beautiful, in the way a glacier is beautiful, vast, cold, and dangerous. He didn't dismiss her. I just watched. His gaze was a physical weight pressing on her skin. She smelled him then, even from this distance. Not just the alpha scent of pine and ozone she remembered, but something else, something cold. The metallic tang of old blood, the sterile scent of deep sunless ice, and beneath it all the faintest trace of rot. The curse. He held her gaze for a full minute. Althea felt a strange pull, not of attraction, but of recognition. Her own Omega nature, usually so quiet, stirred. It wasn't in fear. It was in pity. A muscle in Theron's jaw jumped. He broke the contact first, his head dipping as if in pain. "She stays," he rasped. The voice was like rocks grinding together. Valerius looked stunned. "Your Majesty?" "She stays." Althea was shown to a room. It was not a guest room. It was a cell, barren and cold, with a narrow cot and a single slit for a window. But she knew, without being told, what made it special. It was adjacent to the king's chambers. That night, she learned why the fortress was so quiet. She learned why the king was so still. Through the stone, she heard him. It began as a low groan, the sound of a man fighting his own body. Then a sharp crack as if bone were grating on stone. It was followed by a long, choked-off sound that was half snarl, half scream. The king was not resting. He was spending every night in a silent, solitary war. And through the wall, Althea, the Omega he had not dismissed, lay awake and listened to him lose. The first 3 days were a lesson in absolute stillness. Althea was a ghost in the citadel. She ate her meals of thin broth and hard bread alone in her cell. She was permitted 1 hour of walking on the battlements, the wind whipping her hair, the grey, blighted valley stretching below. The rest of the time she sat on her cot and listened. The sounds from the king's room were a torment. The sharp, contained violence of the nights gave way to a daytime exhaustion so profound, the silence itself felt like a sickness. She heard no footsteps, no conversation, just the occasional ragged sigh that seemed to pass through the very stone. She was the salve, but she was not permitted to see the wound. Valerius had been clear. Your presence in the castle is enough. The king draws on your calm. Do not disturb the balance, but Althea was a healer, and healers do not sit by while a man is dying. On the 4th night, the sound was different. It wasn't the strained agony of his fight with the curse. It was a sharp, wet thud, followed by the clatter of metal on stone. A ewer, perhaps. Then a low, guttural curse, thick with pain. Althea's heart hammered. She waited. There was no other sound. No call for a guard. Just silence, heavier and more dreadful than the noise. She stood, her mind made up. Her bag of herbs and poultices had been taken, but she was resourceful. She'd seen herbs in the kitchen. Comfrey for mending, willow bark for pain, yarrow for blood. She'd pocketed them. In her dark room, she crushed the dried leaves with a small stone, using water from her own pitcher to make a thick, dark paste. It smelled of earth and bitter tea. She padded barefoot to her door. The guard was posted at the end of the hall, not outside her room. He was turned away, staring out a window, lost in the apathy of the castle. She slipped out. The king's door was black oak, banded with iron. It was unbarred. She pushed it open. The room was vast, dominated by a cold hearth and a massive bed that he was not in. The air was frigid. He was by the window, moonlight striping the floor, staining the world silver and black. He was bleeding. He had shattered a mirror, a small, silver-backed thing. A shard was on the floor. His left forearm was slashed open, a deep arterial wound that dripped rhythmically onto the stone. It was not self-inflicted. It was as if his own body had betrayed him, the curse lashing out. He turned, and the sound he made was not human. It was a low, chest-deep snarl, the sound of a wolf cornered. His silver eyes were luminous in the dark, his pupils blown wide. The beast was at the surface, driven by pain. Althea's terror was a physical thing, a cold hand on her throat. She wanted to run. She made herself walk forward. She didn't speak. She held out the small wooden bowl with the poultice. Her hand was shaking so badly the paste trembled. He stared at the bowl. He stared at her. His chest was rising and falling in harsh, quick breaths. The scent of his blood was copper and ice filling the room. "Get out, it's yarrow," she whispered. Her voice was a thread. "It will stop the bleeding. The comfrey will knit it." He snarled again, a flash of teeth in the moonlight. "I am not a man." "You can knit." "No," she agreed, her voice trembling but finding its root. "You are the king. But this is just a wound." She took another step. He was a predator, coiled to strike. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to show her throat. She was an Omega, he was the Alpha. This was the law of their blood. Instead, she dipped her fingers into the poultice. She reached for him. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron. It didn't just stop her, it held her. The power in that grip could shatter her bones. His eyes burned into hers. He was searching for something, fear, ambition, deceit. She just looked at him, her pulse rabbiting against his fingers. She forced her own hand to relax, to go limp in his grasp. A surrender, but not of fear. His breath hitched, her scent. Mild, unassuming. The smell of new leaves, oats, and the clean, sharp scent of the herbs. It was a living smell. In this room of cold stone and dying embers, it was the only living thing. He was shaking. The beast in his eyes warred with the man. Slowly, agonizingly, he released her wrist. He did not offer his arm. He simply waited. Althea's breath shuddered out. She brought her herb-slicked fingers to the bleeding gash on his forearm. His skin was ice. The second her fingers touched him, he flinched so violently he almost threw her off. Her raw gasp was torn from his throat, but it wasn't a gasp of pain. Her touch was warm. She pressed the poultice into the wound, her small, steady hands working against his scarred, massive arm. The contrast was stark. Her pale skin against his, the dark green herbs against the bright, shocking red of his blood. He was rigid, a statue of stone. But under her hands, she felt a fine tremor begin, a shudder that ran from his arm up into his shoulder. He closed his eyes. His head fell back against the stone casement. She found a roll of bandages on a nearby table, clearly for this very purpose. The curse did this often, then. She bound the arm, her movements efficient and practiced. She finished. Her hands lingered for a moment on the knot. "You need a fire," she said, her voice quiet in the vast, cold room. Theron didn't open his eyes. His voice was a wreck torn open. "The cold slows it." "It's slowing you," she replied. She went to the hearth. The embers were there. She added kindling, coaxed it with her breath. A small flame caught, then another. The fire began to crackle, casting a weak golden light. She turned back. He hadn't moved. He was just a shape in the shadows, his breathing still ragged. But the bleeding had stopped. Althea backed toward the door. "Thank you," she whispered, and slipped out. She made it to her own room, her back hitting the door, and slid to the floor, her entire body shaking. She had touched the king. She had defied the Alpha. She should have been terrified of his anger. But the only thing she could feel, the only thing that echoed in her memory, was the profound, bone-deep tremor of a man who had not known a gentle human touch in years. He did not summon her. He did not dismiss her. The next day passed in its usual suffocating silence, but something was different. Althea, emboldened by her trespass, left her cell. The guard at the end of the hall watched her, his expression unreadable, but he did not move to stop her. She went to the kitchens. She procured broth, real thick broth with barley and a heel of fresh bread. She brought it not to her own room, but to the king's. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again, soft but firm. "It is Althea, your majesty. I've brought you food." A low, gravelly sound from within. "Leave it. It's hot," she insisted. "It will be cold in a minute." A longer pause. Then the sound of a bar being lifted. The door opened a crack. A silver eye regarded her. The door opened fully. Theron stood there, draped in a heavy fur robe. In the grey daylight he looked worse. The shadows under his eyes were stark. His face was gaunt. The skin stretched tight over an angular, noble frame. He had not slept. He looked at the tray, then at her. He stepped back, a silent invitation. The fire she had built was a pile of white ash. The room was frigid again. He had bound his own arm, the bandage precise. She set the tray on the table. He did not move toward it. He stood by the window, his back to her, a sentinel guarding his own prison. "You should not have come back," he said. His voice was flat. "You did not eat yesterday. I rarely eat. You will die faster that way." This time his turn was slow. It was not the predatory coil of the night before. It was weary. "That is the point, little Omega. The curse feeds on my life. The faster I burn, the longer the land is held in stasis. My death is the kingdom's only hope." Althea stared at him. "Hope? The land is dying with you. The blight is not held back. It's here. It's in this castle. It's in you." She walked toward him, her heart thudding, but her fear was being replaced by a healer's anger. "What is this curse, Theron? Truly?" His name on her lips was a shock. He flinched, his eyes flashing. "You are bold." "I am an Omega," she said. "I'm meant to be practical. And this," she gestured to the room to him, "is not practical. It is a very slow, very cold suicide. A flicker of something. Dark amusement, perhaps, touched his lips. The elders call it noble sacrifice. Wait, the elders are fools. He went utterly still. Valerius would have you flogged for that. Then he should have me flogged, Althea said, her chin high. But it won't make him any less a fool. He tells you to die and you obey. Theron moved then, closing the distance between them in 2 long, silent strides. He was immense. He loomed over her, a mountain of rage and shadow. He was using his alpha presence, a suffocating weight designed to bring her to her knees. You know nothing, he snarled, his voice vibrating with power. The curse is a living winter. It demands a host. My father. It shattered his mind. My grandfather. It burst his heart. I am the strongest of my line. I have contained it. I have held it in my own body for 18 years, so that it does not bleed out into the fields and the rivers. This cold you feel is my will holding it at bay, and it is failing. Althea did not back down. She was trembling, but she held her ground. You are not containing it. You are feeding it. You are fighting it with your own strength. What if it doesn't want to fight? It is all I have. His voice broke. The rage vanished, leaving only a vast empty desolation. No, she whispered. She looked at his bound arm. You have me. She was not speaking as a woman. She was speaking as a healer. As an omega, his omega. The realization struck them both at the same time. It was not a romance. It was a biological primal fact. Her scent, the quiet living green of the world, was the literal elemental opposite of his curse. She was spring. He was winter. He backed away from her as if she had burned him. I cannot. It will consume you. It wants life, warmth. I am right here, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I am not afraid. You should be. He turned away, but not before she saw the look in his eyes. It was not rage. It was not despair. It was a desperate, terrified hope. For the next week, a new routine was born. She did not move into his room, but she was there. She arrived at dawn, rebuilding the fire, forcing him to eat. She sat in the window seat, mending his tunics. The curse was hard on his clothes, the fabric often tearing when he fought it. He would meditate on his bed, his breathing harsh as he wrestled his invisible enemy. But Althea's presence changed the fight. Her scent filling the room acted as a balm. It soothed the itch of the curse. The nightly violent episodes lessened. They rarely spoke. But the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was shared. She would read to him, mundane passages from a book of herbal lore she'd found. The cadence of her voice was a tether for him, something to hold on to when the cold threatened to pull him under. One afternoon, he was sitting in the chair by the fire she maintained. He'd been asleep, a true deep sleep, the first she had witnessed. She was darning a wool sock, her fingers deft. He woke slowly. He watched her for a long time, his silver eyes clear. Why do you stay, Althea? His voice was quiet, the gravel softened. I did not summon you for this. I did not ask for this. Althea didn't look up from her work. Her needle dipped in and out of the wool. When I was a child, she said, her voice soft, my village was starving. The blight was new. The Alpha King came. He was young, but he was terrifying. He brought grain from the capital at great cost. He saved us. She paused, her fingers stilling. I was small. I didn't understand. I saw him and I thought he was a god. Theron's breathing had stopped. I ran up to him, she murmured, a faint flush on her cheeks. My mother was horrified. I told him I would marry him when I grew up. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. He was frozen, his face pale, his knuckles white on the arm of the chair. You, he whispered. You were the little, sun-haired girl. In the mud. My hair is brown, she said with a small, watery smile. It was gold in the sun, he insisted, his voice raw. I thought I had imagined you. All these years. I thought you were a fever dream. The one good thing. He stared at her, not as a king, not as a curse, but as a man. You are real, he breathed. I am here, she replied. And outside the window, for the first time in 18 years, a patch of thick ice on the stone sill began, very slowly, to melt. The thaw was a false hope. As the days shortened toward the winter solstice, a new, frantic energy filled the citadel. The elders, led by Valerius, grew more agitated. The brief respite Althea's presence had provided was ending. The curse was gathering strength, pushing back. Theron's nights grew violent again. The meditative trances became agonizing battles, leaving him exhausted and brittle. The cold in the castle intensified, creeping back into the rooms, snuffing out the fires. "It is the blood moon," Valerius declared, finding Althea in the hall. His voice was sharp, his gaze accusatory. "You have agitated the balance. Your proximity has made the king weak. He has let down his guard. The curse strengthens." "He is not weak, he is healing," Althea countered, her fists clenched. "He is sleeping. He is eating. He is wasting time," Valerius snapped. "The solstice demands the ritual. It is the old law. It is the only thing that has ever worked. It is the only way he will survive the winter." "What ritual?" Althea's blood went cold. "It is not for an Omega to know. It is the king's duty. Prepare yourself. He will be indisposed." And for some time, Valerius swept past her, leaving a trail of cold dread. Althea would not be dismissed. She had seen the way the elders looked at Theron, not with loyalty, but with the grim practicality of a butcher evaluating livestock. He was a tool, a shield, and they were preparing to use him. She went to the Citadel's library. It was a forgotten, dust-choked room. The lawkeeper was an ancient man, half-blind and forgotten, who did not care who read his books. She searched for solstice and old law. What she found turned her blood to ice. The blight was not a curse. It was a pact. An ancient symbiotic entity the first king had bargained with to secure the mountains. The royal line hosted the entity, and in return the entity kept the kingdom's borders safe from its enemies. But the pact had soured. The entity had grown greedy, its hunger insatiable. It was no longer a symbiont. It was a parasite. The ritual of the blood moon was not a healing. It was a feeding. The texts described how the king must descend to the mountain's heart, to the throne of shadow where the pact was first made. There he would be chained with silver, and the entity would be permitted to bleed the excess, feeding directly on the king's life force and his alpha power. It would placate the entity, driving it back into dormancy for another cycle. It was, as she had suspected, a sacrifice. It didn't heal him. It just reset the clock, and it was what had killed his father. And his father's father. Not in one go, but in increments. A slow, agonizing execution by 1,000 cuts. The ritual didn't save the king. It just bought the kingdom time at the cost of his soul. She slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. They are sacrificing him. They are leading him to his death, and he is going willingly. She ran. She tore through the cold, echoing corridors, her slippers sliding on the stone. She burst into Theron's chambers. The room was full. Valerius was there, and 2 other elders, their faces grim. They were holding heavy ceremonial robes. Theron stood in the center of the room, stripped to the waist. His back was a roadmap of white scars. He looked gaunt, his eyes glassy with the fever of the curse. He was already distant, resigned, and on the table, gleaming in the weak light, was a set of heavy, etched silver chains. "No," Althea breathed. Theron's head lifted. His eyes, clouded with pain, tried to focus on her. "Althea, you should not be here. You cannot do this," she said, walking toward him, her voice trembling with a desperate, sudden fury. "It's a lie." "Althea," Valerius warned, his voice a low threat. "You will leave. Now." "It's not a ritual, it's a feeding," she cried, her eyes locked on Theron's. "It's not saving you. It's killing you. They are letting it feed on you to buy them time." A terrible, profound silence filled the room. The elders froze. Theron just looked at her. The glassy emptiness in his eyes sharpened. He had known. Of course he had known. "It is my duty," he whispered. "It is the price of the crown. The only way. That is a lie," she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. "You told me you were containing it. You're not. You're its meal. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Valerius said, his voice cold as ice. "It is the law. He is the king. It is his duty to die for his people. Then he is not your king, he is your sacrifice." She turned from the elders, running the last few feet to Theron. She didn't touch him. She just stood before him, looking up at this broken, beautiful giant who had given up. 18 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have fought for 18 years. Don't stop now. Don't let them win. Althea, it is." "Too strong," he rasped, his breath catching. The curse was rising. He could feel the blood moon's pull. The pain was making him sweat despite the cold. "The fight. is over. No. She reached up, her hand shaking, and placed it flat on his bare chest, over his heart. His skin was cold, but beneath it his heart beat a slow, heavy, painful drum. "You are not alone," she said. "I am here." He looked down at her hand, at her face. He saw her not as a healer, not as a memory, but as a woman. An omega, his. The glassy look of resignation fractured. A spark of the alpha, the king, returned. Fair flicker of the rage she had seen that first night. But this time it was not directed at her. "She is right," he growled. Valerius's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, you are not well." "I have been a shield," Theron said, his voice gaining strength. He looked at Althea, a new, terrible resolve hardening his face. "Now, I will be a sword." He grabbed her wrist, his grip hard. Not a capture, but an anchor. "Come," he commanded. "Your Majesty, no." Valerius protested. "The catacombs are forbidden." "You said it was my duty," Theron snarled, pulling Althea behind him as he strode toward the door. "My duty, my fight, my terms." He kicked the silver chains off the table. They skittered across the floor with a ringing crash. "I will face this thing," he said, his voice a roar that echoed in the hall. "But I will not go as a sacrifice. I will go as a king, and I will not go alone." He strode out of the room, pulling Althea with him, leaving the elders standing in a silent, stunned tableau of their own broken ritual. The descent was into the bones of the mountain. The air grew colder, heavier, saturated with the smell of wet stone and something ancient and metallic. The only light came from a single torch Theron had ripped from a sconce. His bare, scarred torso was slick with a cold sweat, his breathing harsh. His grip on Althea's hand was a band of iron. "Theron, you're in too much pain." "You can't fight it and me," she pleaded, stumbling to keep up. "I am not fighting you," he grated out. "I am holding on." He was using her as his anchor. Her warmth, her life, her steady, terrified presence. It was the only thing keeping him human as the call of the curse grew stronger, pulling him down into the dark. Valerius and the elders followed, their faces pale with terror and rage. "This is sacrilege," Valerius hissed from the shadows behind them. "You will doom us all. The pact will break." "The pact is broken," Theron roared, not looking back. The sound echoed, part man, part beast. They emerged into a vast natural cavern. It was a cathedral of absolute darkness, the torchlight barely touching the edges. In the center, Althea could see it. The throne, it wasn't a throne. It was a gnarled, jagged chair of black, oily rock that seemed to have grown from the floor. And it was pulsating with a faint, sickly silver light. This was the heart of the blight. The air was so cold Althea's lungs burned. The thing in the throne was a living, sentient hunger. It was a shadow that had weight. "Theron," she whispered, her terror absolute. This is not a... It's a grave." "It is," he agreed. He stopped 10 yards from the throne. He was shaking, his body caught in a violent struggle. The curse inside him wanted to go to its source. It wanted to merge. "Majesty, you must," Valerius urged, his voice desperate. "Take the chains. Appease it." "It is the only way." "No." Theron's voice was strained. He looked at Althea, his silver eyes stark in the torchlight. He was losing. The curse was too strong. It wants me. It wants to feed." "I know," she said, her voice shaking. "I won't let it. You can't." "Stop it." He was failing. The pain was too much. His knees buckled. He was going down. The curse was going to take him right here. Althea's mind raced. The text, the law, the pact, it was a bargain. A bargain of life and power. Valerius and the elders only saw sacrifice. But Althea was a healer. She saw balance. The curse was a cold winter. The king was the dying sun. She was the omega. She was the spring. "It doesn't just want you," Althea said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "It wants life. You've been starving it, fighting it. That's why it's so angry. You're not supposed to fight it, Theron. You're supposed to balance it." He stared at her, uncomprehending. "Balance? It is agony. Because you're alone." She turned to the throne. "You can't have him." She screamed at the darkness. A low psychic groan answered her, a wave of cold that staggered her. "Sacrilege," Valerius shrieked. "She has angered it." The shadows in the room moved. They detached from the walls, coalescing, and surged toward Theron. He roared, a true bestial sound. and shoved Althea behind him, but the fever, the pain and the long, slow starvation had taken their toll. He was too weak. The shadows enveloped him and he cried out a sharp, choked sound. Theron! He was on his knees, his body convulsing. The shadow was sinking into him, his skin turning a sickly, mottled grey. His eyes rolled back. "No," Althea whispered. She thought of the promise. "The little girl in the mud!" The young king. The hope. She remembered his voice in his chambers. First the little girl. The promise. A foolish hope. He had remembered her all this time. He had held on to that one innocent moment as his only light in 18 years of darkness. Anger, pure and bright, surged through her. It was not an alpha's rage. It was an omega's protective, fierce, life-giving fury. "I said," she snarled. "You can't have him." She ran at him. "Althea, no," he gasped. But it was too late. She threw her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his cold, scarred back. She held him, her small body against his massive, convulsing one. "You are not alone," she whispered, her voice fierce. "You are not alone. I am here." She didn't fight the curse. She didn't try to heal it. She just held him. And she poured her own essence, her warmth, her life, her stubborn, spring-scented calm into him. It was like touching fire to ice. Theron screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, but it was human. The shadow hissed, a sound like water on a forge. It recoiled from her touch, from the heat of her. The shadow which had been sinking into him was pushed back. Theron collapsed, his full weight falling against her, driving her to her knees. He was trembling, gasping, but the sickly grey was receding from his skin. She was still holding him, her arms locked around his chest. He was heavy, half unconscious, but he was breathing. It burned, he rasped, his voice thick with disbelief. "I know," she whispered, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. "I felt it." From the shadows Valerius stared, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The ritual had been broken. The sacrifice refused, and the king was still alive. Theron, using her as a brace, slowly, painfully got one foot under him. He was still weak, but the fever, the glassy look was gone. His eyes were clear, and they were fixed on her. "Althea," he breathed, his voice raw with a new, terrifying emotion. He didn't just see a healer. He didn't just see a memory. He saw his mate. The curse was still there in the throne, a coiled, angry shadow. But it was waiting. It was afraid. Theron stood, pulling Althea up with him. He did not release her. He kept her tucked against his side, his arm a possessive band around her waist. He turned to face the throne. He was no longer a sacrifice. He was a king, and for the first time in his life he was not alone. The cavern was silent, save for the harsh sound of Theron's breathing and the faint, oily slither of the shadow in the throne. It was furious. It had been denied its meal. The pact was violated. "You have doomed us," Valerius whispered, his voice trembling. "It will break free. It will consume the valley. It has been consuming me," Theron retorted, his voice a low growl. His arm tightened around Althea. He could feel her warmth, a small, steady furnace against his cold skin. It was giving him strength. "It fed on my line," Theron continued, his voice gaining power as he stared down the shadow. "It took my father's mind and my grandfather's heart. It took my life. It called it a pact." He spat the word. It was a leech. A wave of intense, crushing cold rolled from the throne, a psychic shove meant to bring him to his knees. Theron staggered, a groan ripped from his chest. The curse inside him, the part he had always carried, answered the call. He arched his back, a snarl tearing from his lips. Althea felt the change. The man she was holding was shifting. The power rolling off him was no longer just the king, it was the wolf. "Theron," she cried, gripping his arm. "It is the only way," he gasped, his voice deepening, becoming more gravelly. "It wants a monster. I will give it one. No, that's what it wants. It wants you to lose yourself, to become the beast." "He is right, Althea," Theron ground out, his face contorting. His teeth were elongating. His silver eyes were turning a molten, luminous amber. "I cannot fight it as a man? Then don't fight it at all," she pleaded. "Balance it, like we did." "It is too late," he shoved her away. Not unkindly, but with a desperate, protective force. "Run! I will not!" "Run, Althea!" he roared, and the voice was no longer human. The transformation was an agony of sound. The wet crack of bone, the tearing of muscle. Theron fell to his knees, his back bowing. Black fur shot through with frost silver, erupted from his skin. His form swelled, thickened, his hands becoming claws that gouged the stone. He threw his head back and howled. It was not the call of a wolf. It was a scream of primal rage and 18 years of contained agony. He was magnificent, and he was terrifying. He was a wolf, yes, but a monster of a wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, his fur matted with shadow and rime. He was the winter made flesh. The curse which had lived in him now clung to him, a cloak of writhing darkness. The shadow in the throne pulsed and surged forward. It wasn't attacking. It was joining. The two shadows met and the Beast King was consumed. He became a vortex of cold and fury, his amber eyes burning from within the dark. The entity had its host. This was its victory. By the gods, Valerius whimpered, and finally he and the other elders turned and fled, their footsteps echoing in the dark. Althea was alone. Alone with the monster that had been her king. The beast turned its massive head. It saw her, the small, warm, living thing, the thing that had burned it. It snarled, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling. It began to advance low to the ground, a predator stalking its prey. This was the test. Althea's heart was a frantic drum, so loud she was sure the beast could hear it. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to follow the elders, to hide. She was an Omega. He was the Alpha, consumed by a god of shadow. She was, by every natural law, his prey. She took a step back. Her heel hit a loose stone. The wolf lunged. It covered the distance in a single, terrifying bound, landing where she had been a second before. She fell. Scrambling backward on the stone, the wolf stalked her. It was toying with her. The curse was enjoying her fear. It wanted to taste her terror before it ripped her throat out. She hit the cavern wall, trapped. The beast approached slowly. It lowered its head, sniffing her. The cold rolling off it was so intense. Her skin numbed, her hair frosted. She could smell the ozone, the blood, and the ancient, metallic rot of the curse. It opened its massive jaws. "Theron," she whispered, her voice paralyzed, tears freezing on her cheeks. The beast paused. "Theron," she tried again, her voice cracking, but finding a thread of the strength she'd had before. "I know you're in there. I'm not afraid of you. It was a lie." She was petrified. But she said it. The wolf growled, a low, uncertain sound. "I am not your meal," she said, pushing herself up from the floor, her back against the wall. "And it is not your master." She held out her hand, the one that had touched his arm, the one that had held the poultice. It was shaking violently. "I am Althea," she whispered. "I am the girl. From the village. I am yours." The wolf's burning amber eyes stared at her hand. It saw the warmth. It saw the life. It snarled, confused. The shadow within it recoiled, but the wolf, the Alpha, was drawn to her. The beast was caught in a war with itself. It lunged again, but not to kill. It snapped its jaws shut just an inch from her throat. A warning. A threat. She didn't flinch. "I am here," she said, her voice a raw, broken thing. "I told you. I would marry you. I am not leaving you." She moved her hand, slowly, terribly. She moved it toward the monster's head. The wolf rumbled, a sound like an avalanche. Its lips peeled back from its teeth. She touched him. Her warm, trembling fingers made contact with the rime-caked fur of its muzzle. The jolt was electric. The beast screamed, a sound of agony and release. The shadows clinging to it hissed and were thrown back, as if she had doused it in acid. Her Omega essence, the pure, unfiltered essence of life and balance, was anathema to the shadow. The wolf itself did not pull away. It pressed into her hand. It whimpered. A low canine sound of profound, desperate relief. The massive, monstrous form began to tremble. The shadows, defeated, bled away, retreating to the black throne, where they pulsed, weakened and dormant. The wolf was just a wolf. Still massive, still silver-eyed, the amber was gone, but just a wolf. It looked at her, its gaze no longer hungry, but known. It collapsed at her feet, its great head landing in her lap. Althea sank to the floor, her body finally giving out. She was sobbing great, gasping breaths that hurt her lungs. Her hand was still buried in the fur of his neck. She could feel his heartbeat. It was fast, but it was steady. Slowly, the form beneath her hand shifted. The fur receded. The bones shortened. She was left with her arms wrapped around Theron, who was human again, and naked and unconscious, his head pillowed in her lap. His skin was no longer ice. It was warm. The fever was broken. The curse was not gone. But it was silent. She just held him, her tears dripping onto his face, her breath misting in the cold, quiet dark of the mountain's heart. Time lost its meaning in the deep dark. Althea did not know how long she sat there, cradling Theron's head in her lap. Her own body was numb with cold, her muscles locked and aching. But he was warm. For the first time, he was generating his own heat. She smoothed the damp, silver-shot hair back from his brow. His face in unconsciousness was younger. The lines of pain had eased. The gaunt, hunted look was gone. He was just a man who had, for the first time, won. A sound echoed from the tunnel. Scrabbling, hesitant footsteps. Althea's head snapped up, her body tensing, pulling Theron closer. A light appeared. It was Valerius. His face a mask of disbelief and terror. He was alone. He stared at the scene, at the sleeping human king, at the Omega who held him, at the throne which was now just a silent black rock, its shadowy aura gone. "It is." Dormant, Valerius breathed, his voice awed. The cold. "It's lifting." Althea could feel it too. The oppressive, bone-deep chill of the cavern was receding, replaced by the simple, damp cold of a cave. "He's alive," Althea said, her voice hoarse. "Help me." Valerius, his rigid authority shattered, was suddenly just an old man. He hurried forward, stripping off his own heavy, fur-lined robe. Together they wrapped it around Theron's bare shoulders. What did you do, child?" he asked, his hands shaking. I don't know," Althea whispered. "I just—" reminded him. Theron groaned, his eyes flickering. He focused not on Valerius, but on her. His gaze was immediate, intense. "Althea," he rasped, "I'm here." He tried to sit up, his muscles trembling. "The wolf is you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's you, not the curse." He looked at his own hands, then at her. The memory of the fight, of her hand on his muzzle, of the release, was stark in his mind. He saw her not as a healer, not as a child's memory, but as the other half of his soul. The anchor, the balance. He reached up, his fingers tracing the frozen tear track on her cheek. His touch was hesitant, reverent. "Fausty stayed. I told you I would," she said, a shaky smile touching her lips. Getting him out of the cavern was an ordeal. He was weak, his body ravaged by the transformation, but he was whole. He leaned heavily on Valerius and on Althea, his arm draped over her small shoulders, her arm locked around his waist. When they emerged from the catacombs into the citadel's lower levels, the difference was immediate. The castle was quiet, but it was a different quiet. Not the oppressive, fearful silence of before. It was the simple quiet of a winter's day, and it was warmer. The torches on the walls seemed to burn brighter. The guards who rushed to help them, their faces shocked, were no longer pale and listless. They got him to his chambers. They laid him on his bed. For the first time, Althea saw him between the sheets, not just meditating on top of them. She built the fire, a roaring, blazing thing that filled the room with light and heat. She sent for broth and bread. Valerius, humbled, bowed. "I will. See to the castle," he said, and left them. Althea sat in the chair by the fire, her body finally succumbing to its own exhaustion. She watched him. He was asleep. A true deep healing sleep. She must have drifted off. When she woke, the room was filled with the pale grey light of dawn. The fire was embers, and Theron was awake. He was sitting up in the bed, the fur robe pulled around his waist. He was watching her. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice sleep-thick. "Sore," he said. A small unused smile touched his lips. "And quiet." He looked at his hands. "The itch is gone, the cold. It's just me." He looked at her, his silver eyes clear and bright. "It's just me." "It's still there," she said softly, walking to the bed. "In the mountain. But it's not in you. Because of you, because of us," she corrected. You are the Alpha, the wolf. The king, you are the strength. But you were fighting a shadow. You couldn't hit it. And you," he said, his voice thick. "You are the Omega, the light. You burned it." He reached for her hand. She gave it to him. His skin was warm. He laced his large scarred fingers through her small deft ones. "The ancient laws," he said, his voice quiet. "Valerius, they were built on fear, on sacrifice." "They were wrong," For generations, my line has been fighting a war they couldn't win because they fought it alone. You're not alone anymore. He pulled her gently. She sat on the edge of the bed. The tension, the fear, the patient-healer dynamic, it was all gone. All that was left was the man and the woman in the quiet morning light. He was still a king. She was still an Omega, but the titles felt small. Althea, he said, his voice serious. He raised her hand, turning it over, and pressed his lips to her palm. The touch was a brand, not of ownership, but of fealty. An alpha king bowing to his mate. The promise, he whispered against her skin. The little girl in the mud. She was very bold. She was practical, Althea whispered back, her heart aching with an emotion she was too tired to name. She saw something she wanted. And now, he asked, his silver eyes searching hers. The woman? Does she still? Althea looked at this man. This king, this wolf, this survivor. He was scarred and he was beautiful. He was her balance. She leaned in and for the first time she initiated the touch. She pressed her lips to his, a soft, chaste and profoundly intimate kiss. It tasted of salt and wood smoke and a promise kept. She does, Althea breathed against his mouth. He closed his eyes, a shudder of profound relief running through him. He pulled her closer, his other arm coming around her waist and held her, his face buried in her hair, inhaling her scent of spring and new leaves. The war was over, and the long, long winter was finally beginning to thaw. Epilogue. The first new green leaves of spring were unfurling on the high branches. It had been 3 months since the blood moon. 3 months since the ritual was broken, and the king was reborn. The blight was not gone. It was a scar on the land, a memory in the stone, but it was in retreat. The snowpack was melting, and the rivers ran clean and fast. In the valley, small stubborn patches of green were appearing where for 18 years there had been only rime. The citadel was transformed. The gates were open. The halls, scrubbed clean, were bright with sunlight. The oppressive, unnatural cold was a memory. Althea stood on the battlements where she had once walked in solitude. The wind was still sharp, but it was the wind of a healthy, high mountain spring. It smelled of meltwater and damp earth. Footsteps, quiet and sure, sounded behind her. She didn't have to turn. She felt him. Theron came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar, solid warmth. He was dressed in a simple black tunic, not armor or robes. The scars on his face and arms were stark in the morning light, but his eyes were clear silver. He was no longer a man besieged. He was just a man. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was a simple, practiced gesture now, a quiet anchor that had become their language. Valerius is arguing with the farmers from the lowlands, Theron said, a hint of dry amusement in his voice. They say they have too much grain, and he doesn't know where to store it. It's a good problem. And the curse? She asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. It is quiet, he said. It is where it belongs, in the dark. Theron knows its master now. He looked at her. We both do. Althea smiled. It's not mastery, Theron. It's partnership. Partnership, he agreed, testing the word. He liked it. He turned, taking both her hands, pulling her to face him. He was still the king, still the alpha. But when he looked at her, he was only Theron, the little Omega, he said, his voice soft. Told the alpha king she would marry him. She was very young, Althea replied, her heart beating a steady, happy rhythm. She didn't know he was so much trouble. He is, Theron agreed, his smile widening. It was a sight that still made her heart stumble. He is scarred and difficult, and he is bound to a mountain. And he is warm, she whispered, and strong. And he is kind. And he is mine. He grew serious, his thumbs stroking the backs of her hands. The kingdom is healing, Althea. The crown is heavy, but it is just a crown. It is not a curse. Not anymore. I am free, and I choose you. He dropped to one knee, Althea's breath caught. Theron, you don't... I do, he insisted, his silver eyes looking up at her, earnest and open. I will do this right. Not as a child's promise, not as a fever dream. Althea of the Valley, my healer, my heart, my balance. Will you marry me? The wind whipped her hair around her face, and she was laughing, the sound as clear and bright as the meltwater. Yes, she said. I thought you'd never ask. He rose, sweeping her into his arms, and his kiss was not the chaste, desperate press of the sick room. It was the kiss of a king, of a wolf, of a man, and it tasted of sunlight and freedom and the promise of a long, warm life. This was not a story of a curse broken, but of a balance found. The blight was not an enemy to be conquered, but a broken pact, a primal winter that had been met at last by its spring. The ancient laws built on fear and sacrifice were washed away, and new laws built on partnership and balance began to take root. The crown was no longer a death sentence, but a simple duty, and the love that saved them was not a child's innocent promise, but a woman's defiant choice and a king's humble, healing surrender. Fate had brought them together, but freedom was what they chose.